Hey, Eagle listeners, it's Jessica Marshall. We are technically on hiatus for a few weeks while we prep some exciting new podcast series for you, but we couldn't resist popping back in for a little analysis of this week's primary elections here in New York State. And for that, I'm going to toss now to Times Union Editor-in-Chief Casey Seiler.
Hi, I'm Casey Seiler, editor of the Times Union. I am happy to be joined by my colleagues Chris Churchill, our thrice-a-week columnist, and my fellow editorial board member, and Steve Hughes, who covers Albany, both the city and the county, for us, and is not a member of the Times Union editorial board, as befits the divide between news and opinion at this paper. We are talking on Wednesday morning, a day after Steve stayed up very late to cover what I think it's fair to say was the most closely watched race in the capital region, and that is the Democratic primary for Albany's mayor, which was won by Dorcey Applyrs, the chief city auditor, in commanding fashion. Okay, I will throw this out to the both of you. And Steve, why don't you go first? What was the most surprising thing that you gleaned from the results on Tuesday night, whether it's something big or something small?
I think the biggest surprise was the margin by which Dorcey won. It's not that just she won. The race had basically become a contest between her and Dan Cerruti, but no one I spoke with in the lead up to the race was predicting that she would get more than 50% of the vote. There was talk of whether it would be a plurality, whether it would have to wait for absentee ballots. No one, not anyone on Dorcey's team, not any of the county political people I talked to, saw this result coming.
She won over Cerruti almost 2-1. A little more than 6,300 votes to Cerruti's 3,400. And that was remarkable. Chris, for you, what was the most surprising thing?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. The margin was astonishing. Nobody I talked to seemed to think that she would win like that. I think the other surprising thing was that Corey Ellis and Carolyn McLaughlin, the two other candidates in the race, both really fell off. More so than many of us were expecting. And Corey Ellis got 10 or 11%. Carolyn got 7%. And those are pretty dreadful numbers.
Steve, early in the evening, you did a very good kind of breakdown looking at the early voting. Of course, we didn't know who had cast those ballots, but we could see the activity in the various wards. Based on that, and I'm sure you're digging into the kind of ward by ward counts right now, why did Cerruti come up so short?
I think there's three things to look at. One is just a numbers game in the city. The broad 10,000 foot view of City of Albany Democratic politics there's about three wings, right? There's the more progressive WFP aligned wing, the Gabrielle Romero. There's the Mayor Kathy Sheehan wing, which you can't quite call them moderate Democrats, but for the sake of this conversation, we will. And then there is the more conservative, moderate uptown Democrats that were the base of Dan Cerruti's support. Well, Dorcey had the WFP backing. She had the endorsement from Assemblywoman Gabrielle Romero, and she had the endorsement from Mayor Kathy Sheehan. So that's two legs of the three legs of the city's Democratic Party. She just had the numbers. And then I think the other thing is talking to people in the party, they felt that some of Dan's attack ads on Dorcey really fell flat. The big one being accusing her of missing a large portion of common council meetings back when she was on the council. Well, Dorcey's campaign was ready for that. And they turned around and they said, you know where she was during that? She was on maternity leave for her two daughters and bereavement leave after her mother passed suddenly, which was a really effective turnback on that ad that I think made Dan's attack look very small and petty. So I think those to me sort of help explain how we ended up here.
Chris, would you have any thoughts on those points?
Yeah, I think that all that's accurate. I think if you divide the city into thirds, kind of the lower wards, the middle wards, and the outer or upper wards, the lower wards and the outer wards didn't turn out the way that a lot of us thought they would. And then the middle wards, which are kind of Dorcey's strongest area, they showed up big. The old stereotype used to be that the outer wards were the wards that voted. But more and more, it seems like it's the middle wards, the Pine Hills type wards, where a candidate can really run up the vote total. And, I went to Martel's last night. I went to Cerruti's campaign party. And it was pretty clear as soon as you walked in the door why his campaign wasn't going to win. I mean, it was a crowd that was undiverse in the extreme. It just didn't look like Albany. There's no way you can win with only kind of white older voters in a city as diverse as Albany is. And I think ultimately that was the Achilles heel in his campaign. He just didn't appeal to people outside of his kind of natural, more people from outside his own experience.
Martel's, which is located on the city-owned golf course.
Yeah, on the western edge of the city. I mean, it's a location that's just way too on the nose and just plays too much to the Cerruti stereotype.
Turning to the race for chief city auditor, the position that Dorcey Applyrs will be vacating, Sam Fine, the winner, similarly almost a 2-1 victory over David Galen, who is currently Kathy Sheehan's chief of staff. And obviously the rap against Dorcey Applyrs for so long that a vote for her is essentially a continuation of, the Sheehan administration. She pushed back against that in many ways. And, in talking to the editorial board, noted instances where she had broken with Kathy Sheehan. So is there something of a mixed message there in the idea that for those who say, well, Dorcey's administration will just be a sort of continuation of Kathy Sheehan, but in the rejection of Dave Galen, people were definitely saying maybe that's not exactly what we're into.
Yeah, I think the thing that Sam Fine and Dorcey have in common is that they have the energy of the Working Families Party behind them. I think that was significant in both races. I don't know if you feel the same way, Steve, but the more progressive wing of city politics is where the passion and the energy is right now, and I think it helped both of them.
Yes, I think the WFP endorsement and the organization and volunteers that they bring to the table were a big help. Dorcey's campaign spokeswoman, she shouted out the WFP last night before shouting out Democratic allies. The credit was there saying, hey, you guys showed up for us and we appreciate it. But Sam also won in talking to people last night. Sam won, they said, because Sam outworked everybody. Sam worked hard. So I think that is a big part of this. And the other part is Dorcey has been an elected official in the city for going on a dozen years now. She might not be the most well-known compared to the mayor, but she does have name recognition. And Dave, who's a nice guy, he's a chief of staff. He's a behind the scenes whose name will appear in the Times Union, but he is not someone who is your everyday constituent might know as someone involved in city government. So I think there was a name recognition hump there that he would have had to get over that he just didn't.
I'll put the question to both of you. What will be the biggest challenges that Dorcey Applyrs will face? Will they be administrative in the sense that she's got to make a kind of pivot in sort of her political persona to take on this significantly bigger job than any one she has had up until now? Or will it be external? Will it be challenges that are, the challenges that are facing the city, some portions of the city more than others?
I think that the two big tests that she is going to face in her first year are, one, who does she hire as police chief? Chief Cox came back after Chief Eric Hawkins left, and he's made it clear he does not intend to stick around he's not taking this job as a permanent. He is a placeholder until the next mayor can get in and select that person. And that's going to be a very important test for Dorcey, how she approaches it, who she hires, what is that person's approach to policing, because public safety was clearly a big issue in all of the candidates' campaign. So how she responds to that and how that hire does will play a big role in her first term of her administration. The second one is going to be how she handles the city's finances going forward. One of the biggest credits or achievements, however you want to say it, for Mayor Kathy Sheehan is that when she came in, the city was on pretty rough financial ground and she stabilized it. The city is headed into a couple of very tough budgets. The federal funding from the American Rescue Plan is gone. The Republican in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate are very clearly looking at making budget cuts, which are going to trickle down to the local level because the state will have to cut its budget, which will force local governments to cut its budget. So she is going to be facing a couple of very tight budgets if those plans go forward. I think those are going to be the two things that she's going to have to navigate that are going to determine the success of her 4 years in office.
I would say the toughest challenge is just being the mayor. It's a really, really difficult job. It's a job where when something goes wrong, everybody looks to you and everybody blames you, whether it's the pothole out in front of their street or crime or, a business closing. The mayor tends to be on the hook for all of that. And there's a lot of criticism that comes with being mayor. And she hasn't had a job like that before in Albany, or at least politically. The auditor is a fairly anonymous position that most people don't pay much attention to. Well, the mayor is a totally different ballgame. And until someone's actually in that role, you never really know how well they can handle it.
All right, turning from Albany to New York City and the really, to me, absolutely stunning outcome that befell a former Albany resident, and that, of course, is ex-Governor Andrew Cuomo, who found himself getting dusted in what I think it's fair to say is nationally one of the biggest political upsets in a long, long time. The polls all had him way out in front in the standings. New York, of course, has ranked choice voting, but Cuomo on Tuesday night conceded to Zohran Mamdani, the assemblyman who is a progressive firebrand, in a packed field, just outdid Cuomo in a big way. And I would put the question to you two. Chris, you have written more about Cuomo's attempt at a political comeback 4 years after resigning in disgrace. I mean, what do you think this means for Andrew Cuomo?
To me, it's a humiliation. He was the presumed, and I guess the word presumed is doing a lot of work in this sentence, but he was the presumed front runner for months now, and really feels like it just slipped away from him at the final bell. I agree with you that it was a pretty shocking result. I mean, Mamdani seemed to be surging in recent weeks, but I think people who thought he might win thought it would at least take a second or third round of tabulations before he did so. To have him win pretty decisively in the first round and have Cuomo concede right off the bat, that was something.
Okay, so I'll throw this out. Both races or both primaries, Albany and New York City, were obviously distinct to both of the way that the votes were tallied in each community. Albany, of course, does not have ranked choice voting at this point, and there were different issues animating each. So many differences, but I would draw a similarity between, the fact that the victors, at least at this turning in the primary, were both progressives, and the runners up were two centrists whose campaigns, to a greater or lesser extent, sent a message that these cities are in crisis, and I am the outsider who has the skills and the wherewithal to achieve salvation or at least turnaround. Is there a possibility that in a year or perhaps an age when Democrats are hearing way too much from Republicans, including the one in the White House, that Democrat-run cities and states are perpetual hellholes, to hear Donald Trump describe it in many cases, that is a message that Democrats do not want to hear from Democratic candidates? Or am I overstating the case there?
I think there's something to that. Probably particularly in the Albany case, I think Cerruti was probably hurt by being kind of the outsider businessman who's coming in to save the city. I think there were echoes of, at least for some Democratic voters, echoes of Trump in that. I think my hesitancy would be, though, that Mamdani is also pretty critical of New York. He's critical in a different way. Cuomo was kind of emphasizing crime a lot, but Mamdani was really emphasizing the city's affordability. And I think, he's clearly the real outsider in that race. Cuomo may not be a city resident, or at least hasn't been for very long, but it's impossible to see him as the outsider, particularly because he got almost every endorsement that you could get, really.
I think when it comes to Albany, Dan ran I'll call it a 2023 campaign. And what I mean by that is, Dan enrolled, he was an independent, and then he re-enrolled in the Democratic Party in July 2023 in preparation for a run. And you have to look at the context of the city at that time, where the city was coming off several years of unrelenting gun violence, several years of record-setting numbers of homicides, record-setting numbers of guns being pulled off the street. And that's what Dan ran on. That was the impetus for his run was, the city does not feel safe. I'm going to try and fix it. But this is 2025, and I think Dorcey ran a 2026 campaign. She ran a forward-looking campaign. That was her whole thing, move Albany forward. And I think because the crime in the city has declined since the highs of the immediate post-pandemic levels, voters responded more to that. They said, what is the next mayor going to do to move us forward? And I think that was a big difference in the messages. You never got a sense from Dan about what his campaign was going to do over the next couple of years. It was, I am a public safety law and order candidate, and that just did not resonate with city voters.
This has been a long and eventful primary season. The reason we spend so much time on it, of course, is that the city of Albany has been under Democratic control for more than a century now. So the fact of the matter is that the winner of the primary, barring some kind of asteroid striking the planet level political extinction event, the primary tends to determine what's going to happen in the general election. And for that reason, I really appreciate your good work, along with that of all of our other colleagues who took part in our primary coverage, both leading up to Tuesday night and on Tuesday night. I encourage everyone to get the updated numbers at timesunion.com on our results page, and to read what I'm sure is going to be fascinating analysis from Steve Hughes and from Chris Churchill in the days ahead. For the Eagle and the Times Union, I'm Casey Seiler, and thank you very much for listening.
That is it for now on the Eagle. We're going to go back to our summer hiatus while we work on 2 new exciting limited series podcasts from the Times Union. We will have more on those very soon, so stay tuned. But in the meantime, head over to timesunion.com for all of the latest news and features from the Capital Region and the Hudson Valley. And don't forget to check out all of our social channels too. We got some good stuff up there. The Eagle is a production of the Times Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from the Times Union digital team and the newsroom. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks to Casey Seiler, Steve Hughes, and Chris Churchill for their contributions to this episode. Got questions or comments about the Eagle or any of our podcasts? Email us at podcast@timesunion.com.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.